This is the continuation report of Mr. Joven Nocum, the JRP, GPH, MILF, Peace Process. So, ayon nga sa report ni Mr. Joven Nocum, nung naging presidente si Fidel Ramos, ang unang naging hakbang na ginawa niya was to revive the peace process with the MNLF. He organized a team to conduct exploratory talks with the rebel group starting 1992. So, inspired by the success of the signing of the 1996 final peace agreement with the MNLF, Ramos made initiatives to revive the peace negotiation with the MILF. So, gumawa daw ng hakbangin si Ramos para buhayin ang peace negotiations sa MILF. Nagsimula ang mga exploratory talks sa series ng one-on-one sa pagpupulong ni na Executive Secretary Ruben Torres and MILF Vice Chair of Political Affairs Ghazali Jafar. And sa kanilang mga pagpupulong, they discussed, Torres at Jafar discuss the general mechanism kung paano lapitan ang mga formal na pag-uusap. So as soon as they were able to agree that each side would have a main negotiating panel assisted by an 11 technical committee. So sa sandali ng napagkasunduan daw nila na ang bawat panig ay magkakaroon ng pangunahing negotiating panel na tutulungan ng 11 taong technical committee. So the technical committee will be split into two. We have committee for agenda setting and committee for the cessation of hostilities. And then the formal peace talks began on January 7, 1997 at crossing Simungay, Sultan Kudarat, Maguindanao. And then under sa topic na to, merong note na isinulat sa baba na it was actually during this plebiscite that the 6 towns of Lanao del Norte and 39 barangays of North Cotabato voted for inclusion in the autonomous region. So, ang 6 daw na bayan ng Lanao del Norte at 39 barangays ng North Cotabato ay bumoto para sa pagsasama sa autonomous region. And, however, because the reckoning votes is by province, 6 towns of Lanao del Norte and 39 barangays of North Cotabato were not included. So dahil ang pagtutuos daw ng mga boto ay ayon sa lalawigan, hindi kasama ang 6 na bayan ng Lanao del Norte at ang 39 na barangay ng North Cotabato. And actually, this became the basis of the proposed core territory of the Bangsamoro political entity that the JPH MILF peace process is talking about. So, ito daw ang naging batayan ng panukalang core territory ng Bangsamoro political entity na pinag-uusapan ng JPH MILF peace process. Actually, in its talk with the MILF, the government adopted the acronym GRP for its name, but right after the controversy in 2018, the aborted signing of the Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain, or MOAD, where the JRP panel was blamed, the name was changed to GPH, perhaps to get rid of the stigma brought about by the MOAD controversy. So, ibig sabihin, sa pakikipag-usap nito sa MILF, pinagtibay daw ng gobyerno ang acronym na JRP para sa pangalan nito. Ngunit, pagkatapos ng kontrobersyal noong 2008 na kinasasangkutan ng aborted signing ng MOAD, where they blamed the JRP panel, so ang pangalan ay pinalitan ng JPH marahil upang tanggalin ang stigma na dulot ng MOAD controversy. So the JPH stands for Government of the Philippines, MILF, Moro Islamic Liberation Front. So MILF is a group that broke away from MNLF from 1997. So let's go back to the topic that I discussed. So at the outset, the mood was very positive. Sa joint press statement na inilabas after sa meeting, the two parties considered the events as historic and a step towards the attainment of a just and lasting peace in Mindanao. But later on, that positive mood was changed when President Ramos' term ended in 1998 and his successor Joseph Estrada seemed to adapt opposite approach. So kung ano yung naging approach ni Fidel Ramos noon is magkaiba sa term ni Joseph Estrada. A succeeding event showed ang mga armadong engkwentro sa pagitan ng mga sundalong gobyerno at mga mandirigma ng MILF ay sumira sa usapan. Skirmishes turned ugly until it developed into what we all know as the 2000 all-out war from March to July 2000. The armed forces of the Philippines overran all MILF camps including the main and biggest camp, Abu Bakar. So, ibig sabihin, mabilis na naging pangit daw ang mga labanan hanggang sa ito ay naging kilala nating lahat bilang 2000 all-out war. From March to July 2000, ang AFP is nasakop ang buong kampo ng MILF, pati na rin ang main and biggest camp Abu Bakar. With the superior firepower of the government, tinalikuran na lamang ng mga MILF ang kanilang mga kampo and they resorted to guerrilla warfare. So in other words, the all-out war of Joseph Estrada did not end the rebellion. Despite the disruption sa kabila ng pagputol, the peace process continued. So in March 2001, then Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process Eduardo Ermita and Al-Hajj Murad Ibrahim, then chair of the MILF panel, signed a document that they officially resumed the suspended peace talks. The said document stipulated the both parties. So, itinakda nga ng nasabing dokumento ang magkabilang panig na ang dalawang partido will honor, respect, and implement all past agreements and other supplementary agreements signed by them. Furthermore, nag-sign ulit sila ng ibang dokumento on June 22, 2001 in Tripoli, Libya, where nag-focus sa agenda of the talks on three aspects. We have security, rehabilitation, and ancestral domain. And it is very important na ang parehong partido ay dapat harapin una ang seguridad because this was the requisite for rehabilitation. Ito daw ang napaka-importante for rehabilitation at iba pang mga topics sa usapang pangkapayapaan. So, kinakailangan din nila mag-install ng security mechanisms para mabawasan ang mga pagkagambala sa negosasyong pangkapayapaan by misencounters na madaling mauwi sa malaking digmaan. Note that the minor and major violence between 1997 and 2000 were caused among others by the absence of rules to be observed by combatants of both sides. At para maiwasan ang pag-ulit ng mga pagkakamali, the both parties signed the implementing guidelines and security aspect on August 7, 2001. And through this, the government and MILF agreed to desist from committing prohibited hostile and provocative acts, coordinate their respective movements to prevent misencounters, stop hostilities to allow the conduct of inquiry on incidents by the JRP, MILF, or coordinating committee on cessation of hostilities, and guarantee the security of the negotiating panels as well as that of the members of the CCH. A local monitoring team or LMT was created to monitor the ceasefire arrangement at the provincial level. At ang mas nakakatuwa sa LMT ay na-institutionalize ito ang partisipasyon ng mga lokal na mamamayan sa prosesong pangkapayapaan dahil ang mga members nito ay nakuha mula sa representatives of the local government unit, local political committee of the MILF, non-governmental organization or NGO, and the religious sector within the area. There is a note below that, for example, when AFP and PNP personnel move to arrest ordinary criminals in communities near or within MILF territories without coordinating with the latter, this could be easily be interpreted by the local rebels as an attack against by them. So, kapag ang mga pulis at AFP is humuli ng mga ordinaryong kriminal lang sa malapit o sa loob ng MLF territories, no, iisipin agad nila, ini-interpret agad nila sa isip nila na it could be an attack against by them. So, hence, a simple police operation could easily lead to a deadly misencounter like what happened in Mama Sapano, Maguindanao on January 25, 2015. Where 44 PNP Special Action Force commandos, 18 MILF members, and 5 civilians were killed. So, ang simple na paghuli lang ng kriminal is nauwi sa misencounters, katulad ng nangyari sa Masapano, Maguindanao, noong January 2015. So, maraming namatay, kabilang na ang mga PNP, mga MILF members, and mga civilians. So, matagal-tagal na pala na nangyari ito. At dahil kumbinsado ang mga magkabilang panig na ang mga aktibidad ng mga kriminal na grupo ay humahadlang sa prosesong pangkapayapaan, so they agreed to isolate and interdict them by creating the Ad Hoc Joint Action Group or AJAG in 2002, whose composition is made up of PNP, AFP, and MILF elements. At ang tungkulin ay dalhin ang pag-aresto at pag-neutralize sa mga kriminal na kumikilos o sumilong o sa malapit sa mga lugar ng MILF. So sa katunayan, ang AJAG ay isang uri ng hakbang sa pagbuo ng kumpiyansa upang isulong ang mabuting kalooban at pagtutulungan sa pagitan ng gobyerno at mga mandirigma ng MILF na dating nag-aaway sa isa't isa o dating magkaaway. At gayunpaman, sa kabila ng pag-unlad nito, the violence broke out again in 2003 when the military launched a major campaign at the MILF headquarters in Bulio Complex in the Linguasian Marsh. Inakusahan ng militar ang MILF na sinubukang bawiin ang mga kampo na nasakop ng mga pwersa ng gobyerno noong 2000 all-out war. So on the other hand, MILF made counter-accusations sa pagsasabing ang mga soldiers ang unang nagharas sa kanila. So, this series of violence split over to other party of Central Mindanao and reaching as far as Lanao del Norte. As a consequences of bilang resulta, some 37,000 civilians were displaced. So as a result, 37,000 na civilian ang nawalan ng tirahan. At dahil sa kanilang patuloy na pagsisikap na maghanap ng malikhaing paraan ng magpapabuti ng aspeto ng seguridad ng prosesong pangkapayapaan, ang JRP at MILF bagaman maingat na magkaroon ng layunin sa ikatlong partido, hindi lamang upang subaybayan ang pagpapatupad ng alituntunin sa seguridad, maging isang layunin ng referee sa pagitan ng dalawang partido kung sakaling sumiklab ang laban. That is why, in 2004, the JRP and MILF crafted the terms of reference for the International Monitoring Team or IMT. So, gumawa daw sila ng terms for reference na ang gawain ay subaybayan ang pangkalahatang pagpapatupad ng mga alituntunin sa seguridad at pag-aayos ng tigo-putukan. So the first team was deployed in 2004, which included members from Malaysia, Brunei, Japan, and Libya. And noong 2004, mukhang maayos ang mga bagay hanggang sa unang kalahati ng 2008 nang lumabas ang impormasyon tungkol sa lihim ng paglakda sa isang Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain or MOAD. Remember that along with security and rehabilitation, ancestral domain was one of the foci of the JRP-MILF talks. So, ang ancestral domain is isa sa pinagtutuunan ng mga pag-uusap ng JRPMILF. And the said document was supposed to be signed on August 5, 2008, but because the Philippine Supreme Court issued a temporary restraining order or TRO a day before of its supposed signing, the MOA did not materialize. So, dahil daw naglabas ang Philippine Supreme Court ng temporary restraining order, isang araw bago ang dapat na pagpirma nito ay hindi natupad ng ang MOAD. Ito ay nagdulot ng maraming kaguluhan ang naglabas ng impormasyon tungkol sa MOAD at TRO na inilabas ng Supreme Court. First, the predominantly Christian areas of Iligan, North Cotabato, and Zamboanga organized public protest against a document which they perceived to be affecting their lives without their knowledge. And then, the local MILF commanders such as Bravo and Umbracato launched violent attacks against Christians communities in North Cotabato and Lanao del Norte. So ang mga local commanders ng MILF tulad ni Bravo at Umbracato ay naglunsad daw ng marahas na mga pag-atake laban sa mga pamayanang Kristiyano sa North Cotabato at Lanao del Norte. So, as a response or bilang pagtugon, naglunsad ang AFP ng mga military operation laban sa dalawang commander. And all in all, more than 60,000 Muslim and Christian civilians ang nawala ng tirahan bilang resulta ng halubalo. Then ultimately, the Philippine Supreme Court declared the MOAD unconstitutional on October 14, 2008. While the Supreme Court declared the MOAD unconstitutional, nonetheless, binanggit nito na maaari itong mag-renegotiated or another will one be drawn up upang maisakatuparan ang mga ancestral domain aspect gaya ng napagkasunduan noong 2001. That is why the peace process continued despite the MOAD debacle. And in September 2009, the parties agreed to form an International Contact Group or ICG to help them ensure that the gains of the peace process are sustained. So, ang mga partido is nag-agree na bumuo ng isang International Contact Group upang tulungang matiyak na ang mga natamong prosesong pangkapayapaan ay mananatili. So, the ICG is composed of 4 countries. We have Japan, UK, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. For international NGOs, Muhammadiyah, the Asia Foundation, the HD Center, and Constellation Resources. The ICG has been very helpful in providing support to the parties, the facilitator, and the overall task. So the tasks of the ICG: attend and observe negotiations, maintain trust between the parties, so i-maintain yung trust sa parties, ensure the implementation of mutually agreed approaches, act as a bridge between the parties, the facilitator, local partners, business, and others, provide technical assistance to the parties, and support communicators for peace advocacy. Dahil nga maraming oras, effort, at resources ang na-invest at some gains are becoming apparent, the peace panels ensure that the negotiation will be sustained o mananatili. Then on June 3, 2010, before the end of President Arroyo's term, the parties signed the Declaration of Continuity for Peace Negotiation. And then noong February 9, 2011, the government, hence referred to as GPH now under President Benigno Aquino III, formally resumed the peace process. So, very clear na noong 2011, ang gobyerno na referred as GPH noong under pa kay Presidente Benigno Aquino III is formal nang niresume ang peace process. He then met with MILF Chair Murad Ibrahimin on August to show his sincerity and determination para ipagpatuloy ang peaceful resolution of the Bangsamoro problem. Then, on October 15, 2012, the Framework Agreement on the Bangsamoro or FAB was signed, spelling out the general principles, measures, and steps in creating a new autonomous political entity that will replace the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao or ARM. Ang FAB ay higit na pinahusay sa pamamagitan ng paglalagay ng higit pang details at flesh into the framework. So, the final document was then known as the CAB, which was signed on March 27, 2014. Under sa topic ng Comprehensive Agreement ng Bangsamoro, is may note na nakasulat doon sa baba na the protests in these places were mainly because of fear that their communities will be included in the Bangsamoro Juridical Entity or BJE without their consent. So the BJE refers to the territories and places that were to constitute the Bangsamoro homeland. So ang protesta sa mga lugar na ito is dahil sa takot na ang kanilang komunidad ay masasali sa Bangsamoro Juridical Entity without yung permission nila. So bilang pinakahuling dokumento ng usapang peace talks, ang CAB becomes the final agreement sa pamamagitan ng JPH and MILF. So kung nakikita nyo, may nakasulat dito na the CAB becomes the final agreement between the JPH and MILF. So it spells out specific details hindi lamang sa antas ng fiscal and political autonomy but also on the role of MILF sa sandaling ang new autonomous political entity known as the Bangsamoro will be established. So below are some of the salient features of the CAB. So number 1, it recognizes the Bangsamoro as a distinct identity and acknowledges the status quo. Example, the poor state of Mindanao is not acceptable to both parties. 2, it proposes the establishment of a new autonomous political entity to be known also as Bangsamoro, which will replace the ARM and is not a separate state. 3, the proposed territory of the Bangsamoro covers the present ARM, 6 Lanao del Norte towns, 39 barangays of North Cotabato, voted for inclusion in the 2000 plebiscite, and other contiguous areas who would like to join the Bangsamoro in plebiscite. 4, the proposed Bangsamoro will adopt a ministerial form of government that will have an asymmetric relationship with the national government. 5, the CAB enumerates which powers are reserved to the central government, exclusive to the Bangsamoro and concurrently exercised by both. 6, the foster fiscal autonomy. The Bangsamoro will have an automatic release and appropriation of an annual block grant, the devolution of 4 national taxes to the region, namely capital gains tax, donors tax, estate tax, and documentary stamp tax. Increase in the share of national taxes collected in the region from 70 to 75%. Increase in the share of revenues generated in the region from metallic and non-metallic resources from 70 to 75%, and retention of the 50-50 share from government revenues from fossil fuel. Number 7, to ensure harmony of policies between the central Bangsamoro governments, an intergovernmental relations mechanism will be set up. 8, all residents in Bangsamoro are guaranteed basic rights to life, property, movement, privacy, and freedom of religion and speech. 9, implementation of Sharia shall be to Muslims. The region will be no an Islamic state, rather a secular government that acknowledges the diversity of its inhabitants. 10, the CAB also stipulated that there will be no a phased decommissioning of the MILF weapons and forces. each phase being independent in every milestone that will be achieved. Example, transformation of MILF camps into productive, normal community, etc. 11. During the transition period, the MILF-led Bangsamoro Parliament will be composed of at least 50 members from various local party list representatives, 50%, legislative district representatives, 40%, and indigenous groups, youth, and women's, 10%. 12. The establishment of the Bangsamoro needs an enabling law to be passed by the Philippine Congress. This law is known the Bangsamoro Basic Law.